West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
For the last 24 hours, I have been thinking about something that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said yesterday. You may have seen he came out to announce that he is not just against the ambitious voting rights bill known as the For the People Act, but also the much more limited John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would simply reestablish provisions of the Voting Rights Act that were struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013.
There's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already, and so I think it's unnecessary.
Unnecessary. Already against the law to discriminate on the basis of race. Now, there's a bunch of stuff to unpack here. First, back in 2006, Mitch McConnell not only voted for reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, but as majority whip, he was responsible for getting his Republican colleagues to vote for it too. He even took to the Senate floor to give a speech about it.
We have, of course, renewed the Voting Rights Act periodically since that time, overwhelmingly and on a bipartisan basis, year after year after year, because members of Congress realize that this is a piece of legislation that has worked. And one of my favorite sayings that many of us use from time to time is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is a good piece of legislation that has served an important purpose over many, many years. This landmark piece of legislation will continue to make a difference, not only in the South, but for all of America and for all of us, whether we're African Americans or not.
15 years ago, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you got to wonder when Mitch McConnell thinks it broke. For Mitch McConnell to come out yesterday and say, well, you see, it's already illegal to discriminate on the basis of race for voting, and not be the source of just universal ridicule and condemnation, speaks to just how absent the historical context of race and democracy is in all of our discussions today. McConnell says it's already against the law to discriminate from voting on the basis of race, and so he thinks a law policing that right is unnecessary. Now, there is a very obvious problem here. Those who have studied the history of voting rights in America and the thwarted efforts to achieve a multiracial democracy in this country know it has been against the law to discriminate on the basis of race in voting since 1870, when the 15th Amendment was ratified, saying, quote, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." It says it right there in black and white in the U.S. Constitution. It says it. You cannot racially discriminate in voting. And so you can imagine a version of Mitch McConnell in, 1920 Kentucky saying literally the exact same statement. Oh, well, why would we need a law to enforce voting rights? It's already illegal. Or say avowed segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond in the middle of filibustering the 1957 Civil Rights Act saying, quote, "There are mainly three reasons why I feel the bill should not be passed. The first is that it is unnecessary." Every state has enacted some legislation making it unlawful to intimidate a voter or to hinder him in the exercise of his voting rights. Penalties have been provided for such violations. We don't need new laws to protect the right to vote, certainly not to protect against discrimination or race. Those already exist. It's in the Constitution. Those were the type of arguments segregationists made, Jim Crow authoritarians, decade after decade after decade after decade in this country, as they flogged multiracial democracy to death underneath the table as they gave those speeches. We are not discriminating. The law says we can't. Anyone can vote. This is how Senator James Eastland, a Mississippi notorious segregationist, the voice of the white South, put it to Mike Wallace.
Are you suggesting that your people down in the state of Mississippi encourage Negroes to register and vote?
Well, we have no voting qualifications based on race.
Well, under those circumstances...
We have none at all, and anybody who's qualified can vote.
Mississippi Senator, 1957. We have no voting qualifications based on race. Of course, why would we? It's in the Constitution. We can't. The Constitution ratified in 1870 when Mississippi was under federal occupation. They're all saying the same thing. Strom Thurmond, James Eastland, and, well, Mitch McConnell, 64 years later. And McConnell says this as he is threatening to filibuster the whole set of legislation meant to affirm the franchise, leading to a situation one critic described as a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. And so even though it has been the law since 1870, as Mitch McConnell says, that did not matter to the vast swaths of millions of ostensibly free black Americans who watched their right to vote, the right to participate and self-govern, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution at the cost of the blood of hundreds of thousands. They watched that destroyed, eroded, and gutted by all kinds of means. Extra-legal terrorism in the form of the KKK and lynch mobs, and armed coups that literally took governments away from them, which were multiracial in nature. That happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. White people just storming the town hall, taking it over. And which I imagine you probably have not heard a lot about, because it's not really taught in schools. In fact, armed coups taking power away from legitimately elected multiracial governments happened all over the South. Then, of course, there were the Jim Crow laws, which very studiously, explicitly avoided mentioning race because, again, the 15th Amendment said you cannot. And that's why we had these faux race-neutral restrictions, things like literacy tests, and grandfather clause, and name how many jelly beans are in the jar. Laws that made it almost impossible functionally for black people to vote, despite the right being enshrined in the 15th Amendment. That is the whole story, the whole struggle for making real the promise of multiracial democracy and universal enfranchisement of all adults. So to come out in 2021 and say, well, the law prescribes it, just shows you know nothing about the history, or are you wildly cynical, or both. You cannot understand the efforts of voter suppression. You can't understand what we are seeing today unless you understand this history, because it was precisely methods of ostensibly race-neutral voter suppression. For instance, changing the hours when the registrar was open or making it only open once a month. Those were the methods used to enforce a successful violent reactionary movement in this country that took what was a nascent multiracial democracy in the years of Reconstruction and turned it back into an apartheid state. I've come to believe that story, the story of that fact, that in the wake of the Civil War, we began to put in place the foundations of multiracial democracy, and it was destroyed by a successful effort of white supremacy, is the most important story about America and the least told. When it is not told, it is in the absence of its telling that someone like Mitch McConnell or Republican legislators in Georgia or Texas or Florida can attempt to get away with their nothing to see here attempt to suppress the vote, targeting black and brown people specifically so they can win elections, as has been the case for over a century. And of course, we see these methods all the way up to the federal government. The same goes for the filibuster. Central tool that McConnell is employing at the federal level to block things like the For the People Act, or now he opposes the Voting Rights Act, right? It may sound like just a weird vestige of history. Oh, there's a 50-vote threshold. That's weird. The history of the filibuster is also inextricably bound up with a history of race and Southern obstruction of black enfranchisement. The person who first figured out what would become the modern filibuster, as Adam Jentelson writes in his great book on the subject, was John Calhoun. John Calhoun, the intellectual father of the Confederacy, the man who once famously said slavery was not a necessarily evil, but, quote, a positive good. And yes, the filibuster was used for lots of different things, lots of places, but one of its core central uses was by Southern white senators to block anti-lynching bills in the 20s and 30s, and bills targeting employment and housing discrimination in the 40s and 50s, and to block civil rights bill after civil rights bill after civil rights bill. Earlier, I read a quote condemning the use of the filibuster to block voting rights. You know who said that? Martin Luther King Jr. Here he is, decrying the filibuster as essentially a tool of white supremacy in 1963.
The tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. They won't let the majority of senators vote. And certainly they wouldn't want the majority of people to vote because they know they do not represent the majority of the American people.
Wild to hear that, right? The statement is just as true now as it was 58 years ago. Everything old is new again. If you do not have this historical context, it is hard to truly appreciate what we are seeing in front of our faces. But that history is largely not taught in schools. People don't hear about Reconstruction and all that it represented. People don't know that the state of South Carolina had a majority black lower house of state legislature in 1868. That Mississippi had a black senator in 1970. I mean, I heard about it. I was lucky enough to have great teachers. Thank you, Mr. Kagan. But even that, not a ton. And that brings us to the assault on history that Republicans are now pairing with their assault on voting rights. It's a kind of pincer movement, right? So they're digging in the archives for methods of voter suppression and targeted attacks on enfranchisement of black and brown folks, an attempt to roll back multiracial democracy to stop it from becoming real, while also attacking the teaching of the history that would illuminate to people why that effort is so dangerous. Why it happened before and why it won last time and why it put us where we are now. And so state after state, Fox News and Republicans, conservatives have whipped up a moral panic about so-called critical race theory. More than 20 states have either introduced legislation to ban critical race theory or banned it altogether. Now, critical race theory is an actual doctrine, academic method started by a bunch of scholars of color in the 70s and 80s. It attempts to question some of the race-neutral assumptions about law and power and how they function, particularly in the U.S. I will tell you, I'm not an expert at it. I've read some of it. Like any school of thought, there are critics in the field and between scholars within the field. I don't think it's the definitive word on race and the law or American history. But it's a very different thing than how the term has been applied by conservative activists. A few months ago, Chris Rufo, one of the conservative activists who's pursuing this moral panic, whipping up, gave the game away, tweeting, quote, "The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and it will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans." Just pure cynicism. If you don't like it, then it's critical race theory. That's what he's saying. If you don't like it, if you don't want your white children being taught that, say, white terrorists murdered black people throughout the South in a successful campaign to end the experiment of multiracial democracy and replace it with authoritarian apartheid, well, then that's critical race theory. You see how that works? So now the Republicans are railing about free speech to basically make it impossible or even criminal to teach certain things in schools. But it's all part of the same story, right? They're running back to the old tactics from the past while making it harder at the same time for people to learn the truth about that past. These are two fronts in the same war. It's the oldest battle in this country. Are we going to be a democracy for everyone or not?
It is Thursday, the 10th of June of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, how are ya? Would you like to have a democracy for all? When has that ever been? Come on. Well, we do want a more perfect union, don't we? Yes, that's why we're doing what we're doing. trying to keep the Union unified, even though there are those who just don't want to play the game fair. Okay, well, we know who they are. And what do you do about them? I read that there's a neo-Nazi, an international neo-Nazi group that was thought to have been pretty much destroyed, and it has risen like a phoenix and is recruiting in the U.S. as we speak. Do we worry about it? Yeah, damn right we do. Also read that there are only two countries that are safe for Jews, Israel and the United States. Are you kidding me? Yikes. The premise being that you can't call either one Nazis or, apartheid South Africa. Don't you do it. Okay. I was just looking at how many synagogues that we never hear about being firebombed, graffitied, any number of terrorist activities to, pretty much terrorize people. Holocaust museums, libraries, Jewish libraries, yeah. So, is it safe? Is it? Zal! You'll get my meaning at some point. If you're of a certain age, which we know we all are. Speaking of a certain age, I am not taking to aging very well. I thought I would. But that's because when you're young and beautiful, or cute, you think, the world is your oyster and you'll be a pearl for the whole time. Yeah, you will. Yeah, I also tell everybody that, when they tell you that you're an immortal, they never tell you how much it's going to hurt. They don't take the pain away. You might live for a while, but it's going to hurt like the dickens. So, I just am not taking to aging well. I just don't like having these aches and pains. I was a jock. I know exactly what aches and pains are. I thought I would have, in my older age, at least I won't have the aches and pains I had when I was a jock. No, you'll have the aches and pains of being old. Well, I'm preaching to the choir, aren't I? Stay healthy, wealthy, and wise. And when I say wealthy, it's not necessarily of material goods, though that could be part of it. Nonetheless, think happy thoughts. The world will crumble around you anyway. I hate Nazis. Why do these Nazis have to be... it just hurts. Are they the antimatter that we're supposed to repel? Well, why don't we? So what do you do about an international neo-Nazi group recruiting in the U.S. as we speak? Both FDR and Truman pretty much said no Nazis. But who snuck the Nazis in? Yeah, Richard Nixon helped on that one. All of these guys are such traitors. And look where we are. Yes, this is where we are. Yeah. So what else? There was an eclipse. I missed it. But we did have copious amounts of precipitation overnight. And then it looks like we're going to get about 1/3 of an inch tomorrow. I wouldn't call it a drying out period today. I think it's going to be misty, and which it is right now. But it was quite a bit of rain that fell on us here in Southern Oregon, and I presume it fell even harder in other parts of the state because that's how it usually works. And so up north, I think that they did have quite a bit of rain. Now, this also helps in terms of staving off the fire season. One hopes. Because it doesn't take much to dry things out. And then to have a thunderstorm with not enough rain. And then we have our wildfires, and then they just keep going. So having this little storm blowing through here in June, almost to the middle of June. I would call the 10th almost the middle of June. Almost. 5 days away. And so I'm thinking that would be very helpful because last year around this time, though we didn't have, we did, but not as bad. The part of the reason being is that the wildfires last year were mostly caused by lightning strikes. and the occasional arcing from a power line, that just destroys whole towns and the people living in it. So, but because of the pandemic, people weren't out and about as much either. So, wash your hands, social distance, wear a mask, and put out your fire. Take a bucket with you, with water, sand, whatever it is. Cover that fire, that campfire up, and don't let any embers ember. Yeah, we have to get back into the swing of things since people are going out and about. A little frightening. Oh, I guess I should give an update on my mom. Maybe I mentioned or maybe I didn't, but we had to take her to the hospital. And these aren't HIPAA violations because, mom's a character like, Gunner the English Bulldog, our snoozing sous chef. We elevate them to importance by making them a character in this virtual salon. Anyway, in real life, my mom has gotten this weird arthritis in her spine where it is like corkscrewing her spine. Not just kind of a wavy thing, which happens quite frequently, but it's corkscrewing, rotating. Ew. So when they finally diagnosed that, because she's been in a bit of pain, but she's a tough old gal, just guts through it for the most part. She's not one to take, those kinds of drugs, because they put you to sleep, and she wants to go out and putter about and leave messes for other people to pick up after her. But that's okay. She's mom. So, Mom, here's the debris bucket for all the clippings. Put it in. No, you pick it up after me. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll bring the bucket with me then. But that's good, be active. But she's been in considerable pain and is discussed as much. And when they finally found out, oh my God, I saw the x-rays and the other imagings, and I wouldn't want that. It looks bad. It hurts. It hurts just to look at it. So fortunately, she's now seeing specialists for that particular thing, among other things as well. But in the midst of all this, her blood pressure dropped precipitously this last Sunday, and we decided that we should take Mom to the hospital in an ambulance. My sister being a nurse, because at first I thought it's got to be the machine. The machine is registering incorrectly. It's not calibrated. It lost its calibration somehow. It can't be that low. So I called, went and didn't want to freak my mom out. Because, it's sort of like when your kid falls down a hill, you don't run over there and pick them up because then they think, oh, I hurt myself, I'm going to cry. That's how dads think. So you kind of stand off a little bit. But I have a sister. And by virtue of the fact that, her chromosome's slightly different than mine, maybe she might have a different outlook on life. So, but as I was in the midst of trying to call my sister, my mom got a hold of her. So we got on the phone together, and I had thought that I'd tell my sister, hey, look, this is what's going on. I'm going to put the, cuff on me, and we'll see, if the blood pressure registers somewhat, correct. And actually, I have pretty good blood pressure. Darn. At least for that instance. So it wasn't the machine incorrect. So my sister blasted over here, being only less than a mile, considerably less than a mile. And she did all of Mom's vitals, and we decided very quickly that it would be appropriate to call 911 and get the paramedics over here because Mom needed to be monitored and probably hooked up to an IV, which is exactly what they did. But she's leaking hemoglobin somewhere, so we're a bit concerned about that. And if you know about leaking hemoglobins, you probably know why that would be a concern. But the iron, the ferrous sulfate that they have her on seems to be working well. I'm not a big fan of doing things just by diet, but, we can up the iron, through broccoli. Of course, spinach, everybody knows that. But there's other tasty foodstuffs that are packed with iron and calcium, I might say. So, that is how we're attending to things. But she was only in the hospital overnight. They got her, stable. But her hemoglobin numbers are inching up a bit here, only after a few days of being, get this. She's off every single blood pressure medicine that she was on. Well, yeah, I guess if your blood pressure is, dropping precipitously low and you're taking blood pressure for high blood pressure, maybe you don't want those drugs in you. But I'm also a big proponent that maybe in that instance we can keep blood pressure stabilized through diet and activity, and my mom is active. So that was a bit of a scare. And we are keeping a close eye on her. She had her her appointment with the primary yesterday and went over a few things. But looks like she'll be okay in sorts. Back to her back. She will be getting a series of different kinds of pain medications. When I say medications, it'll be... she's on pills right now until she goes and has a shot, and I think they call it an infusion. I like to call it an intrusion, but an infusion, sort of a spinal block of sorts. And she may get another shot, cortisone or steroid, whatever. I'm not quite sure on that, but it's supposed to be long-lasting, and long-lasting is about a year. So that would be quite lovely for my mom to have, like a whole year until the next time she has to have the shot, a whole year of not having that kind of pain. So maybe they need to cut nerves. They've discussed that, but I'm always worried when you cut nerves in the back. So I'll keep you apprised. I don't think that was a total violation. Mom's just turned 84. And I would say she's a tough old bird. Nah, she's a tough old gal. Okay? Nothing bird-like about my mom, though she is kind of small. Sort of. She's dense. She's pretty powerful. Okay, well, enough of the familial. Let's get into what we're here for, and that's a salon where we mull over the facts of life. And the facts of life somehow involve politics and everything else that entails. Social interaction, you're doing politics. Anyway, so yeah, do you really want to have democracy for a few or democracy for all? Well, yes, we want democracy for all, and these voter suppression efforts, it's just a repeat of the same old history. No wonder they don't want us to know about the history. Well, we won't let them forget. No, we won't. On the rest of the menu, a 3-judge panel of the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals blocked Missouri from enforcing a sweeping state abortion law. Actually, that's a law that bans procedures at or after 8 weeks of pregnancy. Well, good thing for that. The Texas Bar Association is investigating whether State Attorney General Ken Paxton's failed efforts to overturn the 2020 election amounted to professional misconduct. Well, it's about time. And reporters traveling to the UK for President Joe Biden's first overseas trip were delayed for 7 hours after their chartered plane was overrun by cicadas. Chirp, chirp. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Emmanuel Macron, slapped by a 28-year-old royalist, puts French ultra-rightist groups in sharp focus. Try saying that real fast. And President Joe Biden will lay out his vaccination donation plans at the G7 while urging other countries to join in on the global fight. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would then look across the page there near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we were able to pool those dollars with what we pull out of our own wallets. And then we pay our bills. We fly under the radar, and we continue this powerhouse of resistance against the Nazi takeover of America. And that is really how we are fulfilling our civic duty in one way, I should add. But thank you for your generosity, all kidding aside. These are perilous times, and, you know, even though it's quite jocular around here, we do take this all very seriously. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us truly to fulfill a civic duty. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and a whole lot more, too. He and Kelly are just powerhouses of power. Thank you. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please, please, please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, Gunner the English Bulldog, the snoozing sous chef, I guess you can tell he's doing his job. Yeah, that's not logging. There's no logging going on here, even though it sounds like chainsaws. It's something entirely different. An English Bulldog. Yes, snoozing. Let us now tuck in to this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is by Jim Salter out of the Associated Press. Where am I? A federal appeals court yesterday, Wednesday, a panel of that court blocked Missouri from enforcing a sweeping state abortion law that bans the procedures at or after 8 weeks of pregnancy. In other words, before a woman even knows she's pregnant. A 3-judge panel of the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in St. Louis heard arguments in September in the legal battle over the 2019 law. The measure also would prohibit a woman from having an abortion because the fetus has Down syndrome. Yamilis Rodriguez, President and CEO of Reproductive Health Services of Planned Parenthood of the St. Louis region, called the ruling a critical victory for Missourians. For now, we celebrate our continued ability to provide safe legal abortion at the last remaining clinic in Missouri, Rodriguez said in a statement. Republican Attorney General Eric Schmidt said in a statement that his son, Stephen, who has a rare genetic condition, autism and epilepsy, has shown me the inherent beauty and dignity of all life, especially those with special needs. While we're disappointed in the 8th Circuit decision, their decision does provide an avenue for this case to be heard by the Supreme Court. Oh, that was your plan all along? And we plan to seek review in the Supreme Court. Well, I guess he answered my question right there. The lawsuit was filed by Reproductive Health Services, which operates the St. Louis Abortion Clinic, and the ACLU. A federal judge had blocked the law while the legal challenge plays out, prompting the state's appeal to the 8th Circuit. U.S. District Judge Howard Sachs said at the time of his ruling last year that Planned Parenthood and the ACLU would likely succeed in their lawsuit, alleging that the law is unconstitutional. Similar laws have been struck down in North Dakota and Iowa. Most of the discussion at the hearing in September centered around the provision banning abortions because the fetus was diagnosed with Down syndrome. Missouri Solicitor General John Sauer cited an epidemic of abortions targeting children with Down syndrome for elimination solely because of their disability. Planned Parenthood attorney Claudia Hammerman argued at the time that 4 decades of Supreme Court precedent make it clear that this is unconstitutional. She said doctors won't take the risk of losing their medical license for aborting a fetus with Down syndrome, regardless of whether the condition was the reason the woman sought the procedure. several states in 2021 have approved legislation seeking to prohibit abortions based solely on a parental diagnosis of Down syndrome. Governors in Arizona and South Dakota recently signed such bills into law, and similar measures are pending in North Carolina and Texas. Meanwhile, a federal appellate court said Ohio could begin to implement a 2017 law that has been on hold. Missouri also is among several conservative states in recent years that have passed abortion restrictions in hopes that the increasingly conservative Supreme Court, oh, you mean the Christo-fascists, will eventually overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that established a nationwide right to abortion. Of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Texas Bar Association is investigating whether State Attorney General Ken Paxton's failed efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election based on bogus claims of fraud amounted to professional misconduct. The State Bar of Texas initially declined to take up a Democratic Party activist complaint that Paxton's petitioning of the Supreme Court to block Joe Biden's victory was frivolous and unethical. But a tribunal that oversees grievances against lawyers overturned that decision late last month and ordered the bar to look into the accusations against the Republican official. The investigation is yet another liability for the embattled Attorney General, who is facing a years-old criminal case, a separate, newer FBI investigation, and a Republican primary opponent who is seeking to make electoral hay of the various controversies. It also makes Paxton one of the highest-profile lawyers to face professional blowback over their roles in Trump's effort to delegitimize his defeat. A spokesman for the Attorney General's office did not respond to requests for comment. Paxton's defense lawyer, Philip Hilder, declined to comment because, hey, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They're just making it up as they go along. Or, I don't know, maybe they have that Heritage Foundation action pack helping them out with a template. Just fill in the blanks. Kevin Moran, the 71-year-old president of the Galveston Island Democrats, shared his complaint with the AP along with letters from the State Bar of Texas and the Board of Disciplinary Appeals that confirmed the investigation. He said Paxton's efforts to dismiss other states' election results was a wasteful embarrassment for which the Attorney General should lose his law license. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The cicadas were flying. The reporters hoping to join the president in Europe were not. Reporters traveling to the UK for President Joe Biden's first overseas trip were delayed for 7 hours after their chartered plane was overrun by cicadas. The D.C. area is among the many parts of the country that have been swarmed by Brood X cicadas, a large emergence of the loud 17-year insects that take to dive bombing onto moving vehicles and unsuspecting passerbys. There are trillions of them in Washington, Maryland, and the Virginia region, said University of Maryland entomologist Paula Shrewsbury. Even Biden wasn't spared. The president brushed a cicada from the back of his neck as he chatted with his Air Force greeter after arriving at Joint Base Andrews for Wednesday's flight. "Watch out for the cicadas," Biden then told reporters. "I just got one. It just got me." The bugs also tried to stow away on Air Force Two when Vice President Kamala Harris flew to Guatemala on Sunday. The cicadas were caught hiding in folds of the shirts of a Secret Service agent and a photographer and escorted off the plane before takeoff. The cicadas, which sing to attract mates with science fiction-sounding hums, seem to be attracted to other noises, entomologists said. That could be what happened with the plane. The loud machine made noise fools cicadas who interpret the noise as a cicada chorus that they want to join, and they fly towards it. And that's by entomologist Shrewsbury, by the way. I have noted when airplanes fly over my house, the cicadas increase their chorusing sound level, potentially competing with the aircraft noise. It was unclear how cicadas disrupted the mechanics of the press plane. Weather and crew rest issues also contributed to the flight delay late Tuesday. Ultimately, the plane was swapped for another, and the flight took off shortly before 4 a.m. on Wednesday. All right, well then, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Mullen. In the past 20 years alone, 3 coronaviruses have caused major human disease outbreaks. First came the original SARS virus in 2002, then Middle East Respiratory Syndrome in 2012, and in 2019, SARS-CoV-2 emerged, setting off a global pandemic. Hundreds more coronaviruses are lurking in bats and other animals. Scientists have warned that some of these viruses could emerge in the future to infect people. Our current COVID-19 vaccines were specifically designed for SARS-CoV-2. But what if a next-generation vaccine could protect against both known and unknown coronaviruses? Scientists at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research in Silver Spring, Maryland, are working on a so-called universal coronavirus vaccine. Dr. Kevin Majerad is leading the effort.
We've developed a vaccine specifically for SARS-CoV-2, but what we've seen in our animal studies is that the immune response that it induces is active against all the variants, as well as other coronaviruses like SARS-CoV-1 that was seen back in 2002.
Before COVID-19, Majerad and his Army colleague Gordon Joyce were trying to develop a universal vaccine against a different group of viruses, one that includes Lassa virus, which is similar to Ebola.
And so when the new coronavirus was identified as a coronavirus and the sequence was published January 10th of 2020, that night, Dr. Joyce and I had a late-night conversation about turning or pivoting our work that had been ongoing for other viruses towards this coronaviruses and towards coronaviruses as a whole.
Their vaccine is known as a spike ferritin nanoparticle, or SPFN for short. It combines tiny particles from a blood protein called ferritin with coronavirus spike proteins. All coronaviruses have these spike proteins on their surface. The vaccine works by presenting the immune system with the spike protein over and over again in an ordered fashion. But making the vaccine wasn't as simple as attaching one protein to another. Majerud and his colleagues had to figure out which parts of the spike protein to attach to which type of ferritin and how to link the two proteins together. It took months of trying more than 200 different combinations. By June of last year, the team found one version that succeeded where the others had failed. They then tested the experimental vaccine in mice, hamsters, and monkeys. The team also turned to less conventional animals for testing. Working with scientists in India, they injected horses with the vaccine to learn how strong the immune response was. And they collaborated with researchers at the University of Maryland to vaccinate sharks, which make special kinds of antibodies.
We saw the same thing over and over again, regardless of which animal species we were testing it in.
The vaccine produced a potent immune response against the original SARS-CoV-2 strain and 3 of its variants. The animals also developed antibodies against the 2002 SARS virus. The results are encouraging, but animals aren't people. The Army vaccine is now being tested in a small early-stage trial in humans. If it works and is safe, it could lay the foundation for a universal coronavirus vaccine.
The deadly coronaviruses like SARS-1, MERS, and now SARS-2 have all come from animal populations. And there's a strong expectation that this pattern is not going to end anytime soon. So we have to have a platform pre-positioned to anticipate the emergence of new coronaviruses.
But Majerud says it's going to take sustained interest and investment from the government and pharma companies to get a vaccine like this ready in time for the next pandemic.
Our species has a tendency to get distracted. We have a very strong appetite for distraction, and when something is not in the spotlight, when it's not a crisis anymore, we tend to forget and move on to something else. So the biggest challenge is going to be maintaining focus on this next step of developing vaccines that anticipate pandemics.
Thanks for listening. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Mullen.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day striking steelworkers battled back-to-work forces at Newton Steel in Monroe, Michigan. Steelworkers were on strike against 3 steel companies across 5 states in the push to organize Little Steel. Of the 3, Republic Steel sites had experienced brutal picket line violence, especially in South Chicago. Republic had recently purchased Newton Rolling Mill. Management there was bent on forcing the reopening of the plant. John L. Lewis promised 8,000 to 10,000 workers from Detroit to bolster picket lines. The mayor of Monroe, Daniel Naggs, called upon all able-bodied men with military experience to enlist in a citizens' army to escort scabs back to work. Police and hundreds of deputies set up checkpoints on the outskirts of the city to stop suspected CIO supporters from entering Monroe. Black SWAC organizer Leonidas McDonald from Chicago had already been dragged from his car, beaten, and driven from town on foot by scabs earlier in the day. At the same time, Mayor Naggs, company officials, as well as SWAC and company union organizers met in the state's capital with Governor Murphy to negotiate a settlement. As they met, 200 more special police were sworn in and instructed in the use of sidearms and tear gas. Police deputies and scabs armed with guns, clubs, and tear gas shattered the picket line that evening. Then deputies seized strikers' cars and drove them into the river. 18 strikers were hospitalized. Outraged UAW supporters from Pontiac declared a labor holiday in protest and headed to Monroe. But UAW officials ordered them to turn back in an effort to stem the anti-union violence. The organizing drive had been dealt another serious setback.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is 47 degrees Fahrenheit and quite foggy, and our temperature is expected to be nearly the same as yesterday, which was, in the upper 60s, low 70s. Cloudy skies should be prevailing for most of the day, and winds will be out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. I should add, once again, we had copious amounts of water falling from the sky all night. Got up to a little bit, well, not quite a quarter inch, apparently, but close. So cloudy overnight with lows near 50, winds out of the west, northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, increasing chance of rain overnight, and then showers early tomorrow, becoming a steady light rain later in the day, with highs in the mid-60s. Winds will be light and variable, and we're expecting about a quarter inch of rain. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have now increased once again and now stand at 11,365. Our confirmed deceased remain at 146. I'm wearing my mask. Grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window at Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 30 parts per million. And that daytime UV index, even though it's foggy, remains very high at 9. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.25 inches. Visibility is down to a quarter mile. And relative humidity is at 93%. Is that too much coffee or not enough? Anyway, weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 75 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 82 and sunny. Rome is 75 degrees with a rain shower. Kyiv is 70 and fair. Kabul is 85 and fair. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 72 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 46 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 53 and partly cloudy. And New York is actually a pleasant 78 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. and that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Elaine Ganley of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bubbling beneath France's political landscape is an assortment of ultra-right groups, a subculture, that shot to the nation's attention when a young man slapped President Emmanuel Macron and blurted out a centuries-old royalist cry. Ultra-righteous groups are considered increasingly dangerous despite their small following and are on the radar of authorities. Numerous arrests have been made and several groups banned. Challenges to the French identity are often at the center of their ideologies. During Wednesday's cabinet meeting yesterday, Macron stressed the incident a day earlier was an isolated act by a violent individual that would not stop his direct contact with the population. No violence can be considered banal in the country, government spokesman Gabriel Attal said. The town of Tonle-Hermitage, where the assault occurred, was the president's most recent stop on a tour designed to feel the pulse of the country that has been laid low by the coronavirus and trying to get back on its feet. Damien Terrell, age 28, a man who slapped the president, and a second man identified only as Arthur C., also 28, were quickly arrested. Neither had police records, the local prosecutor said. Terrell told investigators he struck without thinking, the prosecutor's office said, and he is to appear to court today, Thursday, on a charge of violence against a person invested with public authority. While Terrell's motives remained unclear, it was his medieval-era cry, Montjoie Saint-Denis, as he slapped Macron's cheek, that pointed to the aggressor's potential interest in the tiny royalist fringe movement. Social media posts showed he followed royalist TV channels and a smattering of extreme right figures. Now, at the home of Arthur C., police found weapons, old books on the art of war, a copy of Adolf Hitler's manifesto Mein Kampf, and 2 flags, one symbolizing communists and another of the Russian Revolution. And he is to be summoned to court next year for illegal possession of arms.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Zeke Miller, Amar Madhani, and Jonathan Lemire of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. 1 year ago, the U.S. was the deadliest hotspot of the COVID-19 pandemic, forcing the cancellation of the Group of 7 summit it was due to host. Now, the U.S. is emerging as a model for how to successfully recover from more than 15 months of the global crisis. In a speech today on the eve of the summit of wealthy G7 democracies, President Joe Biden will outline plans for the U.S. to donate 500 million vaccine doses around the globe over the next year, on top of the 80 million doses he has already pledged by the end of the month. U.S. officials say Biden will also ask fellow G7 leaders to do the same. The U.S. has faced mounting pressure to outline its global vaccine sharing plan, especially as inequities in supply around the world have become more pronounced, and the demand for shots in the U.S. has dropped precipitously in recent weeks. Indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, a liquid salon. Yes, indeed. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.